A bottle tells a story, not the label, not what's inside. The bottle itself, how it's held, how often it's lifted, whether the man holding it is drinking to feel something or drinking to feel nothing at all. Calvin Pruitt held his bottle the second way. He'd been holding it the second way for 3 years. The town of Harlow, Texas, was the kind of town that had stopped arguing with itself about what it was going to be. One main street, 2 saloons, a general store with a broken front window held together by a strip of rawhide, and a population of roughly 400 people who had all, in their own ways, made peace with the fact that this was it. It collected men like Calvin Pruitt the way a still pond collects leaves, not because it wanted them, but because it was the lowest point around. Calvin had arrived 3 years ago on a Tuesday in November, paid 2 weeks in advance at the boarding house on the south end of Main Street, and had been there ever since. Not because Harlow was good, because leaving required a reason, and Calvin had run out of those. He was 41 years old. He looked 60. Not in the way that hard weather ages a man. That kind of age has a dignity to it, a record of miles and work carved into the face. Calvin's age was the other kind, the kind that comes from the inside. From drinking every day for 3 years, from sleeping badly, from carrying something that doesn't get lighter no matter how many bottles you put between yourself and it. Nobody in Harlow knew his name for the first 6 months. They called him the drunk. Not cruelly, just accurately, the way you'd call a blacksmith the blacksmith, or a preacher the preacher. It was what he was. It was all he appeared to be. Calvin hadn't come to Harlow for any particular reason. The road north had run out of excuses to keep him moving, and Harlow was where it ended. That's all. Sometimes that's the whole story, until the story decides it isn't finished with you. On the morning of October the 14th, 1881, Calvin Pruitt was doing what he did every morning. He was sitting against the exterior wall of Harlow's older saloon, the one on the north end of Main Street called the Dusty Fork, which had the better shade in the mornings and the worse whiskey. And Calvin had long ago decided that shade mattered more than whiskey quality when you were planning to be there all day. He had his back against the wood, his legs extended in the dirt, his hat tipped forward over his face. A bottle of whiskey, 3/4 empty, resting in the loose grip of his left hand. The town moved around him the way water moves around a rock, without acknowledgement, without friction, without interest. A woman passed with a basket. 2 men on horseback moved through without glancing down. A boy ran past close enough to kick his boot and didn't bother apologizing. This was Calvin's life. This was what he had made of himself. And then, at 9:30 in the morning, 2 men came out of the alley between the Dusty Fork and the hardware store next to it, talking in low voices, and stopped less than 4 feet from where Calvin sat. They didn't look down. Why would they? He was the drunk. He was furniture. He was as much a part of that wall as the boards behind him. What they said, in those low voices, in those 4 minutes before they moved on, Calvin heard every word. He heard a name, a date, a location. He heard enough to understand that a man named Arthur Goss, a circuit judge scheduled to preside over a land fraud trial in Fort Worth in 8 days, was going to be dead before he reached the courthouse.
And then he heard his own name. Not as someone they were worried about, as an afterthought, a loose end. The drunk saw us come out of the office. You sure he didn't hear anything? Him? He doesn't hear anything. He doesn't know anything. He's nobody. A pause. Still, we can't have loose ends.
Calvin sat with his hat over his face and his bottle in his hand, and did not move a single muscle. He heard them walk away. Then, slowly, he lifted the bottle and took a long drink. He was thinking. Now, before I tell you what Calvin did next, you need to understand what Calvin was. For 12 years, from 1866 to 1878, Calvin Pruitt had been the most precise shooter in the Texas territory. Not the most famous, not the most feared, though fear followed him whether he wanted it or not. Precise is the word. There's a difference between a man who is fast and a man who is precise, and that difference is the distance between a grave and a hospital bed. Calvin was precise. He put bullets exactly where he decided to put them, at distances that made other men put their guns away and reconsider. He'd worked as a hired gun for 12 years. Range disputes, land protection, the occasional job that didn't have a clean name but paid well enough that he didn't ask for one. He'd been good at it, better than good. And then, in the winter of 1878, he'd done something he could not undo. His name was Daniel Reyes. They'd ridden together for 6 years, not partners exactly, not friends exactly, something that existed between those two words and didn't have a clean name either. Daniel was the steadier of the two, quieter, the kind of man who thought before he spoke and meant every word when he did. In the winter of 1878, a cattle baron named Hargrove had approached Calvin with an offer. A large sum, more money than Calvin had seen in one place in his life, to provide information. Just information. Where Daniel Reyes would be on a specific night, what road he'd take. Nothing else. Hargrove would handle the rest. Calvin told himself it wasn't what it was. He told himself Daniel would be fine, that Hargrove just wanted to talk to him, that the money was too much to turn down, and that Daniel was capable of handling himself anyway. He took the money. Daniel Reyes was ambushed on the Caldwell Road that night by 4 of Hargrove's men. He survived, barely. 3 bullets, 2 months recovering in a border town doctor's office, and a right hand that never worked the same way again. He never knew it was Calvin who told them where he'd be. Calvin knew. Calvin had known every day since. That was the weight. That was what the bottle was for. He'd told himself once that a man could carry a thing long enough that it stopped being a wound and became just a weight. He'd been wrong about that. But he'd been sitting against that wall for 3 years, waiting to find out. On the morning of October 14th, 1881, the answer came looking for him. He spent the rest of that day against the wall. He sat until the afternoon light shifted and the shade moved off him and the heat came down, and he let it come. Drank steadily. Let himself be seen being exactly what they thought he was. A man watching him that afternoon would have seen nothing unusual. The drunk doing what the drunk did. What was actually happening inside Calvin Pruitt's head was something else entirely. He'd spent 3 years learning the geometry of this town without meaning to. A man with nothing but time maps his surroundings the way water finds low ground, without intention, without effort, just the slow accumulation of days. The livery loft on the east end, the tannery padlock 2 blocks south that looked locked and wasn't, the shackle corroded through at the base, the whole thing held on appearance alone. The water tower footholds on the hill at the edge of town, the parallel street running behind Main that took 60 steps to reach the corner. He hadn't memorized any of it on purpose. He knew all of it anyway. That was the only thing 3 years of nothing had given him worth spending. He also knew he was drunk the way he was every day. Not falling down drunk, not fighting drunk, just the steady blur he'd come to think of as his baseline. His hands weren't entirely steady. His vision had the soft edges he'd come to think of as normal. He wasn't the man he'd been in 1874, but he was still the man who understood angles, and 7 men couldn't cover every angle in a town this size. They came for him the following evening. Not all 7 at once. They were smarter than that. 2 of them found him at the Dusty Fork, inside this time, at the bar, the specific stool at the far left end that he'd occupied so consistently for 3 years that the barman, a man named Ott, kept it informally reserved.
They sat down on either side of him with the casual confidence of men who have cornered something they consider already caught. The one on his left, the one with the iron-capped boots, whose voice Calvin had catalogued against the wall, put a hand flat on the bar. "You're going to come take a walk with us." Calvin looked at the man, then at his drink, then back at the man. "I'm not done," he said. The man smiled. What happened in the next 4 seconds was not what either of them expected. Calvin's right hand moved. Not fast, not the blur of a young man's practiced draw. Deliberate, economical. The movement of a man who has done this so many times that speed became unnecessary somewhere around the 10,000th repetition. The man on his left was still forming the sentence he intended to say when Calvin's elbow connected with his jaw. A short, precise strike, the kind that doesn't require room to swing. And the man on his right found a Colt pressed against his ribs before his hand had cleared his holster. "Don't," Calvin said. The man didn't. Calvin looked at him for one long moment. "Tell your boss," he said, "that the drunk heard everything." Then he hit him too, took both their guns, walked out the back of the Dusty Fork, and disappeared into the dark. The man with the iron-capped boots was named Roy Decker. He was the second in command of the 7 men Hargrove had sent to Harlow. He was also the younger brother of the man who was in command. His name was Frank Decker, and when Frank found Roy unconscious on the floor of the Dusty Fork with a split jaw and no gun, something shifted in him that had nothing to do with the job anymore. Frank gathered his remaining men outside the saloon, 5 of them, himself, Cole Ferris, Tate, Marsh, and 1 man already posted at the North Road out of town. He looked at them in the lamplight spilling from the saloon windows. "Change of plans," he said. "This isn't a job anymore. Find him." One of the men, the youngest of the group, a kid barely 20 named Cole Ferris, who had been quiet since they'd arrived in Harlow, said, "Frank, he's just a drunk. He doesn't even know who hired us. We walk away, he's got nothing." Frank looked at him. "Roy's got a broken jaw," he said. "We don't walk away from that."
Cole Ferris said nothing else. But he didn't move with the same purpose as the others when they spread out into the dark streets of Harlow. He moved slower. His hand stayed away from his gun. Calvin had 40 seconds on them. He went left out of the Dusty Fork's back door, through the gap between the hardware store and the feed merchant, came out on the parallel street running behind Main, and moved south. He counted his steps. 60 steps to the corner, left. 30 steps to the tannery door. The padlock held on appearance alone. He was inside in 4 seconds. He stood in the dark and let his eyes adjust and thought. He had 2 guns, his own Colt and the one he'd taken from the man at the bar. 6 rounds each, 12 rounds total. 7 men, 1 already down, 6 in the streets. The math left no room for error, and Calvin Pruitt was drunk. He sat down on the tannery floor in the dark, put his back against the wall, and started thinking the way he used to think before jobs that mattered. Let me stop here, because there's something about this situation. A man reduced to nothing, sitting in an abandoned building in the dark, calculating how to survive with impaired hands and 12 bullets against 6, that I keep turning over. Calvin Pruitt wasn't a hero. He'd made that clear to himself a long time ago. In the West of 1881, there was no word for what Calvin Pruitt was carrying. Post-traumatic stress wasn't in anyone's vocabulary. The bottle was the only prescription most men knew. Whether what broke them was a battlefield, a bad job, or their own worst decision made in a moment they couldn't take back. Before we go back to that tannery, I want to know who's listening to this. Whatever country, whatever corner of this world, drop it in the comments. Just that. I read every single one. The first man Frank sent down the South Street was a heavy-set enforcer named Briggs. Briggs moved with the confidence of a man who has done this kind of work many times in well-lit places and hadn't yet learned that darkness changes the arithmetic entirely. He passed the tannery without slowing. Calvin let him get 30 feet past, then came out of the tannery door silent, closed the distance in 8 steps, and ended it without a shot. The handle of the confiscated revolver applied once, precisely, to the base of the skull. Briggs went down without a sound.
Calvin dragged him into the tannery, took his ammunition, 2 full loads, 12 rounds, pressed into his coat pocket one by one in the dark, and was back in position before 60 seconds had passed. 5 men left. The second man was positioned at the corner of the feed merchant's building. Smart positioning, covering 2 approaches at once, and he was watching carefully. Calvin studied him from the shadow of a water barrel for 4 full minutes. The man shifted his weight every 90 seconds, left foot to right foot to left, a habit, predictable. Calvin waited for the shift. In the moment the man's weight transferred and his balance was between feet, Calvin moved. From the left, which the man was watching less because the feed merchant's wall was on the left, and the open street was on the right, and people instinctively watched the open space. Another clean takedown, another body in the shadows, 4 men left. This is when Frank Decker understood he was in trouble. He'd sent 2 men south and heard nothing from either of them. No shots, no shout, nothing. He stood in the middle of Harlow's Main Street and felt the specific chill of a man who has underestimated something. "Spread out," he said quietly. Frank, Cole Ferris, Tate, and Marsh moved apart. Standard spacing, 10 feet between each man. It was the right move. Calvin, watching from the shadow of the livery loft above, recognized it immediately. He adjusted. The livery loft gave him a clear line of sight over the north half of Main Street. He'd gotten up there 20 minutes earlier. Not gracefully, not quickly, but he'd gotten there. And he was lying flat on the boards, watching 4 men move through the lamplight below.
He'd used 4 rounds taking down Briggs's companion earlier. He had 20 rounds remaining across the 3 loads. He waited until the spacing between the 4 men had them moving past the livery one at a time, each briefly isolated from the others by the angle of the building's shadow. Tate came first. Calvin waited until he was directly below, 15 feet, straight down, no angle to manage.
1 shot. The sound exploded through the night, and Calvin was already moving, across the loft, out the back window, down the exterior ladder, into the alley behind the livery, running south. 3 men left. He'd used 8 rounds total. 12 left, split between the 2 guns. 3 men. He sat behind the water trough at the south end of Main Street and breathed carefully and thought.
Frank Decker was no longer thinking about the job. Frank was thinking about Roy's broken jaw. He'd make mistakes because of that. Push too hard, move too fast, put himself in positions that a cold professional wouldn't. Marsh was competent, but followable. He'd go where Frank went.
Cole Ferris had been wrong for this work since they'd ridden into Harlow. Too slow to the gun, too much looking at the bodies on the ground. He wasn't a killer. He was a young man who'd ridden in with the wrong group and was now trying to figure out how to survive the night without becoming something he couldn't come back from. Calvin knew that feeling from a specific direction. 3 men, 12 bullets, one of them he wasn't going to shoot. He stood up from behind the water trough and walked into the middle of the street. Frank Decker saw him first. The drunk, standing in the open, in the middle of the south end of Main Street, in the lamplight, not hiding, not running. Frank stopped. Marsh stopped beside him. Cole Ferris stopped 3 feet behind both of them. 30 feet between them. Frank looked at the man in front of him and felt the specific confusion of a man who has been chasing something all night and has suddenly had it turn around and present itself. "There he is," Frank said. low, controlled, the grief underneath held down by force of will. He reached into his vest pocket and produced a coin. "We'll make this simple." He held it up. "Heads, Marsh goes first. Tails, Cole goes."
Plain text. Cole said, "Frank, quiet." The coin flipped, caught the lamplight on the way up. Frank caught it and slapped it on the back of his wrist. Tails. Frank looked back at Cole. "Your turn." Cole's jaw tightened. He looked at Calvin standing in the street, then back at Frank. Then he stepped forward. Calvin watched him come. Cole walked toward him, not fast, not slow, 40 feet, 30, 20. He was 10 feet away when Calvin spoke. "How old are you, son?" Cole stopped. 22, he said. Then, like he hadn't meant to, "What does that matter?" "Keep walking," Frank called from behind him. Cole's hand went to his gun, hovered there. His eyes moved to Calvin's face, not the face of a man about to shoot him, but something else. Something Cole couldn't read from 10 feet away in bad light. Calvin wasn't looking at Cole. He was looking past Cole's left shoulder, calculating the angle. Marsh had moved up along the left side of the street during the conversation, slow, almost invisible, using Cole as a screen. Frank on the right, stationary, watching. The shot past Cole's ear had to clear by inches, or it wasn't a shot at all. Calvin had made tighter calculations with steadier hands. He did the math. "You don't want to do this," Calvin said. "I know," Cole said, quiet enough that Frank couldn't hear it. Then Cole reached for the gun. Calvin drew. The shot went past Cole's left ear, close enough that Cole felt the air move, and hit Marsh, who had his rifle coming up along the left side of the street. Marsh went down. Cole stood frozen with his gun half drawn. Frank Decker drew and fired in the same motion. Calvin was already moving right, the shot cutting the air where he'd been standing. And Calvin's next shot hit Frank Decker in the chest. Frank Decker sat down in the dirt of Harlow's Main Street. He didn't get up. Cole Ferris stood in the middle of the street with his gun still half drawn, looking at Frank on the ground, looking at Calvin, looking at his own hand. Slowly, he put the gun back. Calvin walked to Frank Decker and looked down at him for a moment. Then he walked to Cole Ferris and stopped in front of him. Cole didn't move, didn't reach for anything, just stood there with the stillness of a man waiting to find out if he's going to live. Calvin looked at him for a long time. "You tried to talk him out of it," Calvin said. Cole said nothing. "Back before this started, I heard you." Something moved in Cole's face. "You didn't want any part of this," Calvin said. "Doesn't matter what I wanted," Cole said. "I rode with them. I'm here." "Yes," Calvin said. "You are." He paused. "Go home, wherever that is. Don't ride with men like Frank again. You're not built for it. And I mean that as the only compliment I have left to give anybody." Cole looked at him, then at the street, then back. "Why are you telling me this instead of—" "Because," Calvin said, "somebody should have told me the same thing 20 years ago. And nobody did." He turned and walked away. He went to the boarding house. He sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. His coat was torn at the left shoulder. His knuckles were split. The shaking in his hands had gotten worse in the last hour, and he looked at them in the dark and thought about Daniel Reyes. He thought about the Caldwell Road. He thought about a right hand that never worked the same way again. He thought about a cattle baron named Hargrove, the same Hargrove whose men he'd just put in the dirt of Harlow's Main Street. The same Hargrove whose operation Calvin had sold Daniel out to protect 3 years ago for money that was gone before summer. The same Hargrove going to trial in Fort Worth in 8 days. Calvin had known this since the morning he overheard the 2 men outside the Dusty Fork. It was the reason he hadn't stayed in the tannery. Surviving wasn't the point. Showing up in that courtroom was the point. He left Harlow before sunrise. No announcement. He packed nothing. There was nothing to pack. Took his coat, his gun, and the horse he'd been boarding at the livery for 3 years against the possibility of a day he'd never quite believed in. He rode north. The flask was in his coat pocket. He could feel the weight of it against his ribs, the exact weight he'd learned to think of as ballast, the thing that kept him level when everything else moved. The want for it was there, steady and familiar as a heartbeat. He rode anyway. 1 mile, then another. The flask stayed where it was. He didn't know yet if that meant anything, but he didn't put it back in his hand either. There was a town called Millard, 4 hours north of Harlow, where a man named Daniel Reyes had been living quietly since 1878. Calvin knew this because he'd made it his business to know. Not to act on, just to know. The way you keep track of a debt you intend to carry forever rather than pay. Fort Worth was north. Millard was on the way. One stop first. He rode through the last of the night and into the gray Texas morning, and the road opened up ahead of him, and for the first time in 3 years, it felt like it was going somewhere. The town of Harlow found 7 bodies the following morning. 4 in various alleys and doorways, 2 in the middle of Main Street, 1 in the tannery that nobody had been inside for a year. Nobody could explain it. The drunk was gone. His stool at the Dusty Fork sat empty for a week before Ott quietly stopped reserving it. Cole Ferris rode south that morning and was never heard from in that part of Texas again. The cattle baron named Hargrove went to trial in Fort Worth on October 22nd. The same man who had paid Calvin Pruitt 3 years earlier to give up Daniel Reyes. A witness testified on the second day, a lean man in a worn coat, steady hands, who gave his account without elaboration and left the courthouse before anyone thought to ask his name. The verdict came in on October 25th. Guilty. I don't know what happened in Millard. I know Calvin Pruitt rode in. I know Daniel Reyes was there. I know that 2 men who share the specific history those 2 shared, betrayal, survival, years of silence on one side and years of unknowing on the other, don't resolve that in a single conversation, if they resolve it at all. Some debts can't be paid. They can only be acknowledged. But here's what I believe about Calvin Pruitt riding north that morning, sober for the first time in 3 years, hands steadying 1 mile at a time. He wasn't riding toward forgiveness. He was riding toward the truth. And sometimes, that's the bravest thing a man can do. Not the gunfight in the dark, not the 7 men, not the years of survival. The morning after. The road toward the one person who deserves to hear what actually happened. The West is full of men who chose the bottle over that road. Calvin Pruitt, on the morning of October 15th, chose the road. Whether Daniel Reyes was waiting at the end of it with a door open or a door closed, that was Daniel's to decide. Calvin could only show up, tell the truth, and let the other person decide what to do with it. That's all any of us can do in the end. Calvin Pruitt sold out the one man who trusted him, took the money, let him get shot. 3 years of drinking didn't change what happened on the Caldwell Road. Now he's riding toward Millard to face it. So I want to ask you something, and I want you to think before you answer. Does a man like Calvin deserve to be forgiven? Drop it in the comments, yes or no. And if the answer is yes, tell me why. Because I'm not sure I know yet, and maybe your answer decides whether I keep telling his story. There's a road between Harlow and Millard I want to walk a little further. If you want to come, you know what to do.